Well, George, we just had you on Life on the Rock, and some of the things we didn't get to touch upon in your work. One is your consulting work. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think probably learned a lot through my own failures, of leading an organization, starting nonprofits, and then through the pandemic, a lot of people were set back in the work that they could do. They had to cut back, and what it really, I think, pushed people to start to think about is, okay, how do we move forward?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't move forward unless you know what you're really about, and so clarifying what your mission is. And
Mm-hmm.
so whether you're a for-profit company or a nonprofit, a mission-based organization, a Catholic organization, a church, if you don't know where you're going, then you have no idea how to
Mm-hmm.
get there. And so it's really mapping out clarity of mission, right? And the vision that pushes you forward. And then how do you build out a strategic plan to get you there? So what does the next 3 years, 1 year look like based on the clarity of your mission?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you get people to buy into that? The people who are part of your company, your organization, how do you get them to breathe and live the same core values that your company is trying to live out each day?
Mm-hmm. So you get it all on paper, you write it out? And...
Yeah, I'm kind of a visual person. I'm a guy, so like I have big sticky notes all over the room, but really mapping out that out and having some fun with it in the strategic plan. And so I've really enjoyed just sitting down with the leaders of these organizations or companies and just hearing what the mission is and bringing some clarity to that, because I think we all have a mission on our heart, whether it be an individual or as a family or as an organization. So one of the things that we've done even as a family is come up with our own mission statement. What is our mission statement as a family? What are we about when we wake up every morning? Do we live that out perfectly? No. We fail at it? Absolutely. But what is it? And so we have older kids now and some kids at home. And everyone can rattle off our mission statement. Why? Because it's on our fridge. We brought clarity to that. And so the same thing is within a company or an organization, a church, a ministry.
I'm curious about your wife. I've never met her, but is she real energetic, real organized type person?
Oh, come on. I'm the front man. I'm the front. She is really the heart and soul of our family. She has a lot of depth. And I always said, like, if I'm going to get to heaven, she's going to drag me there. She's really, that's her focus, and it's great. Might as well. But she's really, she's fun. She's energetic, but she would rather do something with me, like our marriage retreats, than do something off on her own. And so she really feels when we're doing stuff together, whereas I can do other things and be off on my own. I always say I'm just the hype man. She's the heart of it all.
Yes, and you're also doing marriage retreats. Tell us, that's like a fewer amount of people, right, you're working with, like 10 couples, you said, or is it something like that?
Yeah, 10, if you go to renewbyretreat.com, we have this site that's just hosts our retreats, but they're small group retreats. And obviously through COVID, numbers, all those things were like an issue. And these were sort of COVID proof. But what we really found out is when people were coming back from the pandemic is that they desired community. And so having these small group retreats, men, women, and married couples, we'll take 5 couples at a time to a nice place, like a vacation type home with a priest, and go through a whole weekend retreat. And it's amazing because you have community with other people, but then you have a lot of one-on-one time as a couple to just enjoy time together and kind of dig into your marriage.
Right. And what would be some of the topics like you would present on? I assume you'd give some kind of talks and things.
They're kind of in small group sort of format in a living room. And we kind of just present as a facilitator the topic, and then the couple goes and kind of works it out, talks about it, kind of navigates, because every marriage is individual. It's different. We're all called to the same vocation, but like we're all unique in our marriages. We have unique personalities. And so every marriage is very unique. And so you don't want to just say black and white for you, black and white for us, in a sense. So it's really cool to see couples where they come in and kind of dive in. But basically we talk about marriage is about unity, and we break open over the course of the weekend, physical unity, theology of the body, emotional unity, communication, conflict resolution, family of origin, and spiritual unity, our spiritual life, individually and together as a married couple.
Now, are you getting like devout Catholics that say, like they want to practice the church's teaching on contraception and things, or you having to convince them of that?
That's a great question. I mean, the statistics tell us maybe only 3% Catholics practice natural family planning, live out theology of the body. We'll get a mixed group of couples. We have couples who come on the retreat who will literally tell us, we have never heard of this in our life.
Yeah.
We've been married 15 years. We've never heard of theology of the body. We've never heard of natural family planning or the church's teaching on birth control. And so in the session on sexuality, theology of the body, we have a pamphlet of information, and we talk about natural family planning, and some couples are practicing, and some have a lot of questions, and we take each individual couple with kind of their needs and what they have,
What would you tell them about, like, maybe people don't appreciate the unitive aspect that the church's teaching gives a marriage? How does it unite them practicing?
Yeah, when we talk about this in all areas, so you can't just bring up this idea of like sexuality or the physical union and not talk about it in other areas, emotional or spiritual. And so we approach it this way: any area of your marriage where you're withholding yourself, you don't have full unity. And that could be emotionally, you're withholding things, maybe things you don't talk about, things you withhold internally, emotionally. You could be withholding spiritually, based on fears or whatever. And you could be withholding physically in not giving your total self because of birth control. You're not coming freely, totally, faithfully, and fruitfully within your marriage.
Right. And like the spiritually, what would that look like if we withholding spiritually?
Yeah, and so on our last retreat we were doing, and the priest we brought with us, Father Blake Dubrock, who studied a lot of theology of the body. We in this small group session, and he's sitting in there with us. He's kind of laying on a hammock. We're in this beautiful porch in the mountains of this home, and he just unplanned, but just very naturally, as you get to know each other, the conversation becomes deep and comfortable, and he just says, it's interesting that you guys as married couples can, have physical unity in your sexuality together, but a lot of people, you can't spiritually unify. You don't know how to pray together. Like there's this vulnerability that you're afraid of to learn how to navigate the spiritual life together. And yet you could do these other things. And like the guys were just like, okay. He had their attention.
Yeah.
Basically what he's saying is like, you just have to like practice and learn and overcome the obstacles spiritually together. How do we pray together? How do we talk about our faith together? How do we navigate through that together? Let's not avoid it. Because we're spiritual beings, and for us to be unified in our marriage, that has to be a part of it.
And that's the big piece we're talking about, like praying together and obviously going to Mass together and stuff. But
I mean, Mass is like an easy, I say easy, it's an easy first step. Like, let's just go to Mass together. Let's go to adoration together. Now, we're unique in the way maybe we pray or have devotion as men, women, and our personalities. So I'm not saying like we have to do everything together spiritually, like prayer. But learning what works for you as a couple to unite you spiritually is very important. What is that for you?
Yeah. And it is vulnerable. I mean, sometimes even in community, like to pray with my religious brothers and things, you do kind of, put yourself out there a little bit if you're praying intensely for something. It's like, why am I afraid to pray with them?
Yeah, I remember one couple, an older couple, said, the woman said, I wish I could hear my husband pray so I know what was going on in his heart. And I think that's a woman's desire, but it also showed that they probably weren't navigating well through the emotional unity piece either. Like if they were really engaged emotionally, able to communicate, talk about deep things, it would then help on the spiritual side too, because there's nothing that you're afraid to talk about spiritually as well.
And what are you seeing, like in the couples and your observations, just in the culture? like problems in marriage today? What are the kind of the threats? What's tearing at it? What's making it hard?
I mean, a lot of people will point to the main things that people divorce over or fight about are finances, sexuality, inability to communicate. But those are surface issues. And I always say, like, what's the underlying issues? Like, what's underneath fighting over finances or the inability to resolve issues or, sexuality? What I and my wife have found in preparing couples for marriage, we have couples in our home and we prepare them, and having married couples in our home and doing retreats with them. I think so much of the struggle in marriage is family of origin issues, issues, undealt issues that people bring into their marriage that they don't even know is an issue until they get married. That could be coming from divorced families, lack of knowing how to communicate, how people fought, like abuse, physical, emotional, spiritual, all those things come into your marriage. And then all of a sudden, you're faced with another person daily.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that come to the surface in that.
That's what they say about religious life. When a man enters, he's bringing his whole family with him.
Yes. I always say, like, what I tell married couples, because I've learned this my own self, is like, you come with baggage. And my hope for you is by the time you get married, you're not going to get rid of all your baggage, but you'll be in a carry-on. And if you can downsize to a carry-on, then the other person can navigate through your carry-on. But if you're coming with a U-Haul truckload, man, it's going to be pretty difficult. And so you got to do a little of the hard work before you get married. But marriage in its very nature, just like living in community life, helps us to navigate through some of those things if we're open to the healing process and like growing through them.
Yeah. And you have your own story with that. Your parents were divorced, you mentioned, and you've done work on that. What are some things you've learned and the work you've done on yourself in that regard?
I think the main thing I've learned a lot. A marriage is the school of relationship, and so it's kind of what you observe, you absorb, and then you repeat, right? And you don't even know that. And so just recognizing, what did I observe and absorb that was kind of hindered me from being fully a good husband and father? And then what did I need to work through? Like, what are some of the brokenness or wounds there, not only from my parents, but just from life in general. And then ultimately, just as a guy, saying, admitting that I needed to do some hard work around those areas,
And healing for you would be like our faith helps us, or maybe relationships with other guys or something. That's
all of that, community. But the church is a place it's an infirmary. The sacraments are beautiful. The grace of the Eucharist and reconciliation helps us to navigate through life. It gives us the grace. And learning the process of healing is just simply inviting Jesus, his grace, this is the presence of the Lord, into broken areas of our life and saying, Lord, like, heal that area, speak truth to it, so that I can live differently. I don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over. I don't want to get angry every time this happens, or I don't want to avoid conflict every time this happens. Help me to navigate through that.
And for you, did you like do journaling, or was it just like personal prayer, just bringing this wound to Jesus in prayer and ask him to heal it? Or
I don't know if there's one way. Journaling, adoration, like praying with maybe a memory or a wound, having someone pray with me who's kind of skilled in that healing area, and then having just community and friends, having trusted friends, my wife, my spouse, to talk through some of those things, I think is just very healing in and of itself. For example, like we didn't, I have a lot of examples, but one of our goals as a family was we wanted to do dinner together as a family, like as our kids, it was hard when they were little. They didn't, sit down real well. But I remember my wife one time, and I was kind of a little flustered, and all the kids left the table. So a while back, a long time ago, and she looked at me. She says, "You're okay." And I don't know, for some reason, I had the grace not to snap back at her in that moment. And I just said, it just hit me that I never learned how to have dinner with other people at a table.
Right.
And so, like, I'm learning how to do this, and I don't know how. And I think for her, a light came on. It's like, oh, this helps me to be more patient with you.
Right.
As we kind of navigate through the chaos of family. And so I just was like committed myself to like learning how to like have dinner as a family and just learning how to like sounds crazy, but that was part of my story.
No, I think it's a problem, like with maybe less, I don't know what the stats are, but less families having the family meal every evening. There seems like there's so many ways that parents can get a read on their children to see where they're at, but also, just having to communicate with one another at dinner, or just, having the extended family of grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, which we're more, we live away from them more. People are much more transient, I guess, when we work, so we're separated. But, I think of that growing up, like, I didn't live near extended family, but every year we'd go down to New Orleans and visit family and spend time. But, in those kind of things, you got to talk with people, you laugh with people, and, might have disagreements and stuff. And it teaches you how to communicate.
Totally.
If you're looking at your screen all day, you're not learning how to.
It's interesting. We have 3 of our kids are out of the house now. And our oldest daughter is about to get married. And we'll ask kids, what's one of your greatest memories? Or like, what did y'all, and they'll say, dinner around the table. And I'm like floored by this, right? Because it's very simple. We don't do anything. We just have dinner.
Right.
And we've decided that no topic is off limits at the table. You could talk about anything. You could say anything. You can communicate. We've fought at the table. We've cried at the table. We've resolved at the table.
Right.
We've laughed. All those things. And you're right. Like, that's in community. As a family, as a small community, you learn how to not only communicate, interact, say you're sorry, hurt people, laugh with people, and you just got to let it happen.
Right. And you also have done a lot of work on the topic of masculinity. You've got a new book, relatively new book, Holy Grit. And what are some of the things there you see in the landscape of masculinity in our culture? It's kind of a mess for what
it is a mess. And it's like, how do you even define the mess? But the reality is like, men are men. God created men to be men. And we need to just be the man God created us to be. Now, the whole idea of this toxic masculinity is, men throughout all of the ages, all of history, have misused their masculinity. We can just, admit that. And that is the fallen state. That is the sin of man, is to dominate the other, particularly a woman, right? To push someone down and dominate, to use another person. That was never masculinity, and still never will be.
Right.
And that is toxic to society. Authentic masculinity is the man who is unafraid to face challenges, to serve, to love, to defend the weak, to stand in the gap, to lead. And the genesis of the book Holy Grit is, what I have found the struggle with men is that we live in boxes. And so we can say, I want to be gritty. I want to do hard things. I want to be masculine. And yes, God created us to be gritty, to be tough, to do hard things. But he created us to know and love him, to be holy. And so the book is about, how do you merge those two things together, not separate those things, to be holy and gritty. You can't be holy and not gritty. Because what I have found is that there have been, a lot of men who I've known who have just quit on the faith. It got hard and they gave up. And I'm like, wait, well, it got hard. Well, you didn't have grit, and that's something we're all trying to work on. But that's the reality. Authentic masculinity is merging grace and grit together.
Yeah, Teresa of Avila talked about the most important virtue. One of them is just perseverance. You know, we can become discouraged, quit, and give up. But I remember I heard Father Dave Pavanka preaching one time, and he said something along the lines. He said, you know, we're supposed to be seeking heaven, seeking the kingdom, and, you know, we'll get there if we don't give up. It's not that we're never going to fall.
So good.
Yeah, but just don't give up. Get up and start moving again, you know?
I remember one of the craziest pieces of advice I got, I was engaged to be married. This would have been 1996. And I asked a friend of mine who was older what one piece of advice was. And I was kind of carrying a journal around asking people different advice. And it was weird because it wasn't what I was expecting. He said, my greatest advice to you is that the only thing you'll have in your marriage some days is your commitment to your commitment. And I remember thinking, what about love? What about feelings? What about emotion? He just said commitment to commitment. And that's kind of what you're saying, Father, is if you just like commit to the long term, you'll get to where you're going. You know, it's not going to be easy. And I remember it hit me one day. I was like, I don't want to do this today. This is really hard. You know, she's getting on my nerves. And I remember thinking, commitment to my vocation, that's it. And what I found is that commitment just pushes you through the hard times. You get to the other side of it.
And that's why we need vows. You have marriage vows, you got vows in religious life and the priesthood. It's like few of us are able, you know, just to really wake up every day and make the right decision on our own. You know, we need that kind of commitment and that severity of a vow, you know, that we've made.
And there's nothing wrong with your vow, your commitment being the only thing that you have at that moment. Like that's what it's for. Like you cling to that. Like, Lord, I don't feel you in prayer. I'm dry. I'm in desolation. Whatever. But I'm committed to you. And that commitment, that vow you make to the Lord moves you forward instead of backwards. And I think it's kind of what you were saying, Father Dave was saying. I love that.
And I think too, I mean, it might be times of your greatest merit, you know, if you're not feeling it and you're doing the right thing, that's you're being purified. You know, your motives are, it's not, you know, I'm having to die to myself. It's not about me. I'm not getting what I want out of it. And it's like, all of a sudden I'm learning how to give and be charitable, like a real sacrificial love.
Christ, a real, I can't imagine that when Jesus carried the cross that he wanted to. Like he was like, I couldn't wait for this. And I can't imagine when St. Maximilian Kolbe took the place of another to be murdered, that he thought to himself, man, I could not wait to do this. This sounds so fun to me, to go into a bunker and die. Like, you know, so like he had to fight his humanity to make a sacrificial decision. And because his commitment was so deep. And so like, sometimes doing the hard thing isn't something that we want to do. It doesn't feel good.
And you talk about fellowship a lot and that need to be like men, to be with other men especially. And I think about, and I say this all the time on these podcasts, it seems like, but like the witness of like family, I think that's the importance. You know, family kind of forces us to be together. Like if we had maybe friends, we might drift in and out of their lives, you know, as we go along through life. But, you know, family kind of keeps bringing us back together. But what I come back to, like when I look at my grandparents and things, they're all deceased now, but like their witness of carrying the cross, their witness of persevering through trials, their witness of having serious illnesses or great loss. And it's like, when I hit something, I can say, well, they did that. They went through that. I can do that too. You know, I can go through this.
That was important to me in writing the book for men, was highlighting a saint in each chapter. Because I think men really need examples, you know, not make-believe, not mythical characters, not fictional, but real people who lived real lives, who did the real things. And so these saints were real men who walked this earth, who have real stories. And for me, it paints a picture of like, wow, if St. Augustine could do that, so can I. If St. Louis Martin can do that, so can I. If St. Ignatius can do it, as St. Joseph, St. John
Mm-hmm.
Paul. And we think, oh, well, they're saints. I can never be like that. No, the great thing is I learned so much about their human story,
Yeah.
about the backdrop of how they grew up. And I was like, hey, they're human. They're no different.
Yeah.
You know, and it really, I had sort of another conversion by writing about these saints.
Right. You know, I had an experience that I was in Poland in October, I think, and we went to Maximilian Kolbe's place, and I just always just imagined him as like very kind of severe, tough guy, you know, austere, and you know, he had like, I think it was 700 friars at that community. They were just doing all this incredible work, and they had a daily paper at one point. They had radio. They had a plane. They had a landing strip for a plane to deliver these papers and things. And but you know, I heard that they had an excellent tour guide there. I talked a lot with, and she was telling me, you know, the friars loved him, and he had like a gentleness about him, a tenderness, one-on-one. It's like he was just very good, and very encouraging. And yes, lived an austere life, but also was good, kind to people, and you know, merciful and things. And I was so struck by this one story that, you know, there was a bishop in Japan that invited him, you know, because he's had a doctorate from the Angelic, or wherever, maybe it was the Angelic, I forgot where his doctorate was from, but he went there to teach in the seminary in Japan. Mm-hmm. And so they're a persecuted church in Japan, in just a small little seminary. He went with a handful of other brothers, priests. And he didn't have the big numbers. You know, I just thought wherever he went, he'd just have huge numbers and be a great success. That this tour guide, she was more than a tour guide. She was like something of a scholar with it. But she was saying he was surrounded by holy figures as well in their own right, you know, that helped him do Nipocolano. And here, I don't know, he didn't have the numbers. So one day he was discouraged. You know, the guy that could last in a bunker for how many days, you know, he was discouraged. And I think it was a point of Mariology. You know, he was pushing a strong, lived out Mariology every day, you know, even the way they greet each other. And this priest from his order, you know, questioned him, you know, isn't this like too much? And this simple brother who was there was known for his holiness, but not a theologian, anything. And he tells Maximilian Kolbe, he said, it'll be okay. And that encouraged him. You know? And I thought, wow, I mean, this guy who died in a bunker voluntarily and went through the horrors of Auschwitz, he needed encouragement, you know? And so what do we need, you know? And what kind of, we need that encouragement. We need that kind of contact. Yeah. And to be open to it, you know, not to think you have to slug it out by yourself all the time.
And that's the thing, is like no saint becomes a saint on their own.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and we can't look at these saints like they weren't human. They are. And the path for all of us is sainthood, whether we're, you know, obviously, you know, not, you know, the goal is to be recognized, canonized saint, but to enter into heaven, you know, to get there of sainthood. And so St. Maximilian Kolbe, just needing encouragement is so beautiful. Like, I love knowing the human side of a saint because it makes my life seem more doable.
Right.
You know? Like, oh, I'm not alone in this. I can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I had one of the older sisters up in Hansville tell me, you know, she was here since, I think 1963. You know, Mother came back in 1961. So she saw all the struggles, the trials, the money problems, everything. And she said, you know, she said, don't be discouraged. She said, and hold on to joy, you know, because joy can be a defense. You know, the evil one wants to discourage us. And I've come to see it, I have greater appreciation for what St. John warns us, the world, the flesh, and the devil. You know, it's not just Satan himself tempting us, but it's that fallen spirit of the world, of our own flesh that we carry around with us all the time, that wants the easier path, you know, and doesn't want to die to yourself and wants to be self-indulgence, wants to do what you want to. So you got all that kind of pulling at you. And a protector of that is to live the joy, Right? And sometimes I think we can talk ourselves out of joy by just focusing on the problem, and just regurgitating the problem and the issue. And well, okay, maybe we don't see a success there, but every day God's blessing us with something and people in our lives and stuff that can encourage us. And one of our priests, he was just sent a picture. This family sent them this picture of their little toddler. I mean, the girl was really young, maybe like 3. And it's this picture from behind where she's kneeling down with hands folded in front of a crucifix on the wall. And it just is very sweet picture, but there's also something very deep about it that, yeah, maybe her parents forced her down in that position, but still, we are children kneeling. At the end of the day,
Amen.
We're kneeling before the cross. And we're saying, help us, Lord, forgive me, Lord. Whatever it is, we're focused on a Christ that is crucified, following him. And I was like so moved by that. I joked, I said, it can't be that simple, Father, is it? I'm like, yeah, we make it complicated. We're distracted. We're torn, but make it that simple again.
And Jesus does, doesn't he? He says, just come to me like a little child, And I think the older we get, the further we get away from thinking that we're God's, sons and daughters, but we never stop being that, And when, my daughter's getting married soon, and, it's I have a lot of emotion around that. It's a good thing, but it's interesting because as a dad, when I look at her, like when I physically lay eyes on her, I see her in her baptismal gown or her first communion gown. Mm-hmm. And yet she's coming out in her wedding dress, and I still see her as the little girl.
Right.
And that'll never go away.
Yeah.
I think with God, it's the same way. Like he never stops cherishing us as his sons and daughters. Right.
Yeah, we might think of it some other way, but we're his children.
Yeah.
We need to be dependent on him, need to trust him.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
without a doubt.
So men need to be connected with other men. I think you said on the show, men need to teach other men. And what is your advice there? I mean, some guys, it's hard for them to connect with others. I always look at our culture and I say it's always like feeding isolation and individuality. Like even like media, right? We're all in our own ghettos and our entertainments and what we're looking at on the internet and our own pursuits and everything. And there was some book written years ago about lamenting the loss of bowling leagues. We don't come together to bowl anymore, right?
Yeah.
We're in our rooms doing whatever,
Well, I think you bring it up. I mean, I think you're spot on when you talk about isolation. A recent study came out said that, one of the greatest causes of death among adult men is loneliness. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, wow, like that's the place in our culture where men are isolating themselves. Maybe they worked and they're retired and they lost friendships. They lost on the internet. They're lonely even inside their marriages. And what we need is to be pulled out back into the bowling league, the community, fellowship, friendship, and that's so important for men. If not, we struggle with loneliness and isolation. And of course, who works the greatest in isolation? The enemy.
Yeah.
I mean, he just wreaks havoc in a guy's heart and mind in isolation.
Right. I think that's clearly the women's, one of their gifts is that relationship and building relationships. Mm-hmm. And men can really struggle with that. They don't have that skills or something, that drive.
Women are very communal. And you'll see that in older women. If they're widowed, they might not get remarried. They just naturally find friends and join clubs. And, where, a guy either gets remarried soon or gets lonely and passes away. Men struggle with that. But I think the enemy plays into that instead of us being intentional about seeking out community.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Paul, for your time today and coming. And got to head back to Lafayette.
Yeah.
Got a crawfish boil going on.
Yeah, heck yeah, man. You know what it's like down there. The food's great, the people, the culture. But yeah, thanks for having me on. This is wonderful. Yeah. And if people want to find the book on masculinity, it's easy, holygrit.org.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much.